Hi everyone, I'm Mandy and welcome to my channel. So for today's video, I'm going to be sharing all of the games I played in 2023. These yearly overviews are some of my favourite videos to make. It's hard to believe this is my 4th year doing it. It's also my biggest year in terms of the amount of games I've played, so I'm excited to look back and reflect on everything. Just like last year, we're going to be doing these by category, so I'm going to start with JRPGs, followed by adventure games and visual novels, and then I'm going to throw in a new category dedicated to simulation and management games, and then finally we'll round it out with all the miscellaneous titles. I've talked about a lot of these games in various seasonal videos, so if anything I share here interests you and you want to know more about them, I'll link the relevant ones in the description. But there will also be a handful of games that I haven't talked about on the channel yet, which I can't wait to show you. So without further ado, here are all the video games I played in 2023. So looking back, I played a lot of really strong RPGs last year. The first of which was Fire Emblem Engage. Fire Emblem is one of my favourite franchises, so it was really exciting to experience a new entry that wasn't just a brand new story, but also a beautiful tribute to the series' history. The gameplay was a ton of fun, as usual. I really enjoyed playing with the emblem rings in this one, and figuring out different builds for each of my units. Also, it was so flippin' gorgeous. It has this beautifully vibrant colour palette that just fills me with happiness. I honestly think it's one of the best looking games on the console. The next game I played was Octopath Traveler 2. Octopath Traveler was actually my favourite Switch game for a really long time. I loved the job system, and I thought the way that they split the story up into 8 separate paths was really cool. And in my opinion, Octopath 2 is even better. They've added lots of quality of life improvements and made some adjustments to the job mechanics that are really nice. Personally, I found I was a little more engaged with the stories this time round too. Overall, I was just really happy with it. Also, Critical Clash 2 has become a staple on my running playlist. It's one of the best battle themes I've heard in a really long time, and it still gives me chills every time I hear it. We have a very special RPG up next, and that is Grandia. I decided to replay the original PS1 version because I was looking to get some gameplay footage for a collab I was working on with Cold Knights Gaming and Just the Gems. Grandia 2 is my favourite game of all time. I know that's probably a surprise, it's not something I talk about a lot or incorporate into my persona in any way. Grandia 1 I actually played quite a bit later. And I love it almost as much as Grandia 2. It has a lot of that same heart to it, and naturally a lot of similarities in battle mechanics and music and all that fun stuff. I'll link that collab down below if you want to hear me talk more about it, and if you want to hear Jay and Brandon share some of their favourite PS1 RPGs. The next RPG I played was Trails in the Sky FC. This was a really long time coming for me. I'd been wanting to get into Trails ever since I was a teenager, and for some reason I just kept putting it off. My husband Tony also wanted to play Sky, so a few years ago we decided we'd each get our own copy and then play through the story together. We started it a few times, but with our schedules at the time it was always a little difficult to fully commit. But anyway, last year we finally made it work, and I immediately fell in love with it. I talk about this a bit more in my spring vlog, but for some reason it felt really nostalgic to me, and playing it made me feel so happy. In a lot of ways it felt similar to Grandia 2, so I instantly clicked with it. We're planning on finishing off the trilogy this year, which I am really looking forward to. The next game I played was Rhapsody: A Musical Adventure. This is a turn-based musical RPG that first released on the PS1. I played the Switch port and I adored it so much. It's a really cheesy story with a lot of witty and self-aware writing, but somehow they've found a way to make it feel really touching at the same time. There are so many really sweet moments in the story and also in the songs, and it just felt so comforting to play. It took me about 10 hours, so if you're looking for a shorter RPG, I really recommend checking it out. It's definitely become a new favourite of mine. Now this next RPG is quite a contrast against the sweetness of Rhapsody, and that is none other than the dark and gritty Final Fantasy XVI. I think I'm not alone when I say that this was one of my most anticipated games of the year. I have a lot of thoughts about it, which I shared in my summer video. Overall, I really enjoyed it, but I think it did suffer from some pretty big pacing issues. As far as the story goes, I enjoyed it, but compared with the other Final Fantasies I've played, it does sit a little low in my ranking. I did love the battle system though. It felt very fluid. There was actually a point where I took a big break from the game, and I was able to jump back into the flow of it really easily. But yeah, despite its flaws, I think the game was really good overall. Next up is Atelier Marie remake, The Alchemist of Selberg. This is a remake of the first Atelier game, which they've actually included as a bonus for the Digital Deluxe Edition. It was previously exclusive to Japan, so it's amazing that we finally have it, though honestly I really dislike the fact that it's locked behind that edition. It's such an important entry, and I think it deserves to be made available separately. But anyway, I played this version first and I was immediately hooked. Understandably, it's a lot more primitive than the Atelier games of today, but I actually really enjoyed that. It's very management heavy, but it's also very short, so there's a really quick payoff that makes it difficult to put the game down. The amount of progress you can see from just 1 hour of playing is crazy. And the remake was done really well. I actually did a pretty extensive review of it, so I'll link that down below if you want the whole breakdown. The next RPG I played was .hack Infection for the PS2. This is the very first game in the .hack franchise, which is another series that I've been wanting to get into for the longest time. The game takes place within this fictional MMO called The World. You play as the main character Kite, playing his character in the MMO. The premise of the story is that a number of people have fallen into a coma after playing the game, including Kite's best friend. So he's on a quest to find out why this has been happening and hopefully find a way to reverse it. I think this game has such a creative premise, and they've done a really great job at simulating that MMO experience. The way story progression works is really cool. When you're not logged into the world, you can read message boards and emails, which will give Kite some leads on new areas that might help in his investigation. This story is told over the course of 4 games, and then after that there's the .hack GU trilogy and a bunch of other connected media. So I've really only seen the surface of the .hack world, but it's definitely made a big impression on me so far. And finally, the last RPG I played in 2023 was another replay of one of my favourite games of all time, Wild Arms 3. Now I've mentioned this before, but for anyone who doesn't know, Wild Arms 3 was my first proper JRPG. When I was a kid, my mum was actually really into RPGs, so I used to watch her play them all the time. And that's how I was introduced to Wild Arms 3, which was the first one I decided to take up for myself. I don't think I had a great understanding of the story and the gameplay mechanics back then, but I was completely enamored with the characters and the world. This is where my love for gaming began, so naturally it's a very comforting and nostalgic game for me. I'll be talking more about it in an upcoming video, so be on the lookout for that if you want to hear about why I love it so much. So now let's move on to some adventure games and visual novels. The first one I played was Professor Layton vs Phoenix Wright on the 3DS. It's a kind of funny story how this came about. I've mentioned before that Ace Attorney is one of my favourite series, which is why when this crossover came out in 2014, I bought it immediately. But I let it sit for a while because at that point in time I hadn't played any of the Professor Layton games, and I really wanted to get the most out of the experience. Fast forward to March last year when the eShop was shutting down, I still hadn't played it for some wild reason. There was a lot of talk that the downloadable post-game content would be unavailable once the store shut, but it couldn't be accessed until you'd completed the game. I actually don't think that content was lost with the shop closure because it wasn't technically DLC, but maybe someone could confirm that for me. But obviously, as a huge Ace Attorney fan, there was no way I was going to take that risk. So I binged it in one weekend and finished it a day before the closure. And I do not regret that at all. That was an amazing weekend. Without spoiling too much, the last case in the game takes place throughout the course of one really long night, so I think the fact that I was pulling an all-nighter with them made my experience and connection with it a lot stronger. It was almost like I was right there with them, working till dawn to get to the bottom of one of the craziest cases we'd ever seen. And it was really crazy. Seriously, at one point it started to feel like a fever dream. But yeah, overall I loved the game and I couldn't put it down. If you're a fan of either franchise and you haven't played it yet, I really recommend it. It's a wild ride, so my advice to you is just to buckle up and remember that every puzzle has an answer and nothing is too crazy for an Ace Attorney game. Or a Layton one, for that matter. Continuing with another Shutakumi banger, we have the Ghost Trick remaster. The original was one of my favourite DS games, so I was ecstatic when this remaster was announced. It's about a ghost who's on a quest to solve his own murder. There are lots of puzzle sequences where he uses his powers to interact with objects in the living world, which is where the trick in Ghost Trick comes from. It has a fantastic story. It's very well written, with lots of twists and turns. I did a full review for this one too, so I'll link that below. Next up is Evans Remains. This is a mystery puzzle adventure game that I absolutely adored. It's roughly 3 hours long, and in that time it tells a really interesting story about a girl who's travelled to a mysterious island to find a missing person named Evan. The story is interspersed with these really fun jumping puzzles that are solved using logic rather than platforming skill. This is one of my favourite games I played last year, and I think it's such a hidden gem. You can hear more about it in my summer video. So the first, and I guess the only, proper visual novel I played last year was Air. This was my first time reading the VN, but I was very familiar with the story because the anime was one of my favourites when I was a teenager. It's about a travelling street performer who's searching for this mysterious girl in the sky, who's said to be suffering from a legendary curse. Naturally, there's a lot of slice of life stuff mixed in, and a lot of drama, but it's honestly a very emotional story, and I may have cried a little. I'm really happy that I finally decided to play it through. As good as the anime is, the story works a lot better in this format, which is unsurprising. Next up, we have Coffee Talk Episode 2, Hibiscus and Butterfly. I'm a big fan of the original Coffee Talk, so I was really excited for this sequel to come out. The premise of the games is that you are a barista who runs a late-night coffee shop. You have a bunch of regular patrons who will come in and discuss their lives and woes with you. And it's set in a fantasy world, so most of these patrons are mythical creatures. Coffee Talk 2 was a really worthy sequel in my opinion. It continued some of the storylines we saw in the first game, and also introduced some new ones that were really well written. I'll be talking a bit more in depth about it in an upcoming video, so keep an eye out for that if you're interested. Next up is Masm Jekyll and Hyde, which is one of the games I played during the Halloween season. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is one of my favourite classic books, so when I found this point-and-click adaptation, I was really excited. It took me about 4 hours to beat, so it's not a very long one, but I was pretty happy with the quality of it. It's very faithful to the novella, and does a good job capturing that same feeling of unease and mystery. The only thing I really disliked about it was that the puzzles were pretty bad. There was no challenge to them, and I feel like they took more away from the experience than they added. But aside from that, I did enjoy the game. Another game I played over Halloween was The Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood. This is a game that plays a little like Coffee Talk in that the story is told predominantly through conversations. It's about a witch named Fortuna who has been exiled from her coven and is living in confinement on an asteroid. A cool thing about this one is that there's a lot of opportunity to shape the story, in dialogue choices and also in Fortuna's tarot reading. You get to choose how you want to interpret the cards, and naturally that has consequences for the fates of the characters you're reading for. You also get to design the cards yourself, which is a lot of fun. Next we have Ebe, which is a really short horror adventure game with lots of fun environmental puzzles. It follows a girl who gets transported to another plane inside this art museum. In this realm, all the art pieces have come to life, and a lot of them are out to get her. I really enjoyed the puzzles, but the story wasn't as fleshed out as I would have liked. That said, it is only 2 hours long. But ultimately, I think it makes for a really fun one-shot experience. And finally, the last game I have to share in this category is Decarnation. This is an indie horror adventure game that explores themes of human resilience and the battles of mental health. I'm not going to beat around the bush, this was one of my favourite games last year, and I don't think it gets as much recognition as it deserves. It took me about 5 or 6 hours, so it's a pretty short experience, but it was such a memorable one. I talk about this one in my Halloween video, so please check that out because there is no way I could do it justice in the time I have for this one. I also recommend having a listen to the soundtrack. It features a bunch of French pop songs that were written by a group called Fleur and Bleu, and they are so good. I must have listened to Generation Palmier over 100 times since beating the game. It's so uplifting and I love it so much. So that's it for the adventure games and visual novels. Moving on now to the simulation and management category. The first game I have to share is an early access tavern management sim called Traveller's Rest. I loved this game. I think everything about it, from the atmosphere to the gameplay, is so much fun. I started playing in July, and since then there have already been a bunch of updates. The devs are very actively working on it and implementing their changes as they go, which is fantastic. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, but I personally love being a part of the process and watching the game grow from something I already really enjoyed to something even greater. The gameplay loop focuses on managing your inn during the nighttime and then crafting supplies, decor, and dishes in the daytime, which you can use to make your business more successful. I can't get enough of games like this, and I'm glad there's still so much to look forward to in this one. Next up, we have Grim Grimoire once more. Now, I guess this is more of a strategy adventure game, but the gameplay gives me that same kick as Traveller's Rest, so under the umbrella of management is where it goes. I always wanted to play Grim Grimoire, so when I heard it was getting a remaster, I was really excited. It's a tower defense strategy game that takes place in a magic academy. I had so much fun with the battle stages because your success really hinges on your ability to manage and weave different branches of magic together. There are lots of different types of units, so once you reach a point in which you have a good understanding of which ones work well with one another, and how to use different magic branches to supplement the weaknesses of another, there's a lot of payoff. I won't spoil the story, but it's really good and has great pacing. So yeah, the game was an absolute joy to play through. And finally, we have Little Witch in the Woods. This is a really charming crafting sim where you play as an apprentice witch who spends her days making potions, exploring the forest, and helping out residents of the village. This one is also in early access, but I really enjoyed what they had to offer so far. You can find more on this one in my Halloween vlog. So now I'll share the rest of the games I played last year that I couldn't quite fit in any of the aforementioned categories. The first one is Tears of the Kingdom. I talked quite extensively about my feelings on the game in my spring vlog, so I don't have too much to add here. But I will just say that I adored it, and I think it's even surpassed Breath of the Wild for me, even though I really see them as two sides of a whole. The massive scope of exploration and the way the game fosters creativity is incredible to me. The fact that there's never just one way to solve a puzzle or a right way to do things is such an amazing thing, and a really good message to send too. I think it's incredible what the game was able to achieve with that. Now we have 2 rhythm games in this category, the first being Final Fantasy's Theatre Rhythm Final Bar Line, which, believe it or not, was my most anticipated game of the year. Curtain Call was one of my favourite 3DS games, and I was so excited at the prospect of getting a bigger, definitive version for modern platforms. And in most ways, we did. Final Bar Line is a big step up from Curtain Call. There's a new difficulty level available on some of the songs, and a much bigger selection of music. There were some decisions made that disappointed me to my core, but I think I'll save that rant for another day. But yeah, despite my personal grievances, it's still easily one of my top 10 Switch games. The second rhythm game I played was Samba de Amigo Party Central. I was interested in this game when I first saw it in the February Direct, but what really sold me on it was when I watched my good friend Jay from Cold Nights Gaming stream it on his Twitch. Side note, if you're looking for new streams to watch and you haven't checked out Jay's, I can't recommend them enough. They're always a ton of fun, and Jay is such an entertaining and genuine host. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with Samba de Amigo, though I think it's definitely more of a casual rhythm game. There are 3 difficulty levels and then a crazy mode, which is more of a silly, anything goes kind of mode. There is some challenge in the game, but I found that it didn't take too long to master the songs, even on super hard. The motion controls are fun, but not that precise, so having the option to switch back and forth between shake mode and button mode is a really nice feature. I think the biggest drawback of the game is definitely the song selection. It has 40 tracks, which are mostly pop songs, and they can be hit or miss. Even the DLC song packs are a little lackluster. The Persona 5 one is pretty cool, but you could also just play Persona 5 Dancing, so... Next we have an awesome little Metroidvania called Haiku the Robot. This isn't a genre I find myself playing very often, but I think I might need to change that because I had so much fun with this game. You play as a robot named Haiku, who is wading his way through this mechanical world full of corrupted robots. I honestly loved everything about it. I thought the pacing was great, and the platforming was so smooth and so much fun to master. This one is also featuring in an upcoming video, and I can't wait to tell you more about it. And finally, the last game I played in 2023 was Blue Stinger on the Dreamcast. I talked about this one in my last video. It's a really fun, really campy action-adventure game that has elements of survival horror. It was one of the first games that released on the Dreamcast, and even though it is a little dated now, I genuinely had a blast playing it. I really love going back to play these old Dreamcast games. Because I was kind of late to the system, there are lots that I still have to experience, which is something I'd like to work on this year actually. So yeah, I really enjoyed Blue Stinger, and it was so much fun to play through the Christmas season. So those were all the games I played in 2023. We came in at a total of 26, or 27, if you count both versions of Atelier Marie. I know that sounds like a lot, and honestly seeing them all lined up like this is kind of blowing my mind, but keep in mind 11 of them were under 10 hours, and some of them were as little as 3 or 4, so those beefed up the number pretty quickly. I'd love to hear what everyone else has been playing, maybe some of your personal 2023 favourites. So that's all for today's video. Thank you so much for sticking around till the end, I really appreciate the support. I hope you guys have a lovely day, and I will see you next time. Bye!